How much is Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi to blame for the ongoing violence against the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar? I'll ask one of her fellow Nobel laureates, the renowned Bangladeshi economist Dr Yunus. I'm Mehdi Hassan. As a new generation of feminists have risen up around the world in what's been called the third wave, a central question has emerged in the movement. Should feminists support all women's choices, or are some choices holding women back? That's our debate. But first, in what the UN has called a textbook example of ethnic cleansing, in recent weeks more than 500,000 Rohingya Muslims have fled Myanmar for neighbouring Bangladesh. Myanmar's security forces and Buddhist vigilantes have been accused of mass rape, murder and the burning of entire villages. So, how much is the country's de facto leader Aung San Suu Kyi to blame? And how is Bangladesh handling the mass influx of Rohingya refugees? This week's headliner, Nobel Peace Laureate, economist and author of the new book A World of Three Zeros, Dr Yunus. Dr Yunus, thanks for joining me on UpFront. We're going to talk about your new book, A World of Three Zeros, in a moment, but I have to start talking with you about perhaps the biggest story in the world right now in many ways, because you are one of a select band of individuals who have been honoured with a Nobel Peace Prize, and yet one of your fellow Nobel Peace Laureates, Aung San Suu Kyi, currently seems to be complicit in brutal violence, ethnic cleansing, possibly genocide against the Rohingya Muslim minority in Myanmar. How does that make you feel?
I feel terrible. It's the most shameful thing, terrible thing that happened. To me, it's the #1 news item right now. And I feel it every day because the people are coming. I'm from the same region where the Rohingya people are coming in, Chittagong. I feel this Nobel Peace Prize that she got, she had one image, whole world showered with admiration and respect for her. Now she got completely reverse her position. She has another face, which is about atrocities, about killing her own citizens. These Rohingyas were born there, lived there for generations. And when the country became independent, they were automatically became the citizens. They participated in politics. They sent their representatives in the parliament. They were the cabinet members. Suddenly, in 1982, military government comes up with the idea
stripping them of rights.
Stripping the right. They are no longer citizens.
So let me ask you this: in Myanmar right now, what we're seeing is what the UN has called a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. Last year, you signed a letter to the UN Security Council with a dozen other Nobel laureates expressing, quote, frustration at Aung San Suu Kyi for her refusal to act on this issue. Just to be clear, because a lot of people kind of point the blame in different directions, how much blame do you place on her directly for the current crisis, for this ongoing violence and refugee movement?
I'll put 100% of the blame on her because she is the leader. She can say that the army is pushing me or somebody.
A lot of people would say the military are really in charge. What can she do?
Well, then she should resign. I can't handle it because this is their own citizen. It's not a few people.
So by staying on, she's blessing the military operation.
Blessing, and not only that, verbally she's defending it.
Yeah.
She says, I don't know why these people are going. No, we don't have atrocity. No, it is Arakanese who are attacking us. All kinds of things. There is no atrocities in villages, burning of villages. These are all false. She made that statement. These are all false news. So she takes all the blame herself. So there's no way you can part it with the military or anybody else. She gets all the blame and she's responsible for it and she has to fix it.
So when your fellow Nobel Peace Laureate, Jose Ramos Horta of East Timor, who signed that letter with you last year.
That's right.
But a few months ago he was on this show and he was basically defending Aung San Suu Kyi. He said she's handling a very complex, delicate situation. She cannot antagonize the military. Quote, criticism probably is misdirected more to her than to the military. What do you say to him?
I'll say the same thing. I mean, if she cannot say the things she should say, then she's no leader. Leader is supposed to stand by their own people.
Have you had any contact with Aung San Suu Kyi yourself in recent months?
I met her several times before, not before this incident, before the election.
Yeah.
I mentioned about Rohingyas and so on. She said, well, I have to be very careful about the military. I cannot say anything. Okay, but when the election is over, if I'm the winner, I'm definitely taking a stand in favor.
Oh, she said that to you?
She said that to me.
Oh, wow. So she's gone back on that in your view.
Absolutely.
And if you could speak to her directly today, what would you say to her? What should she be doing?
I said, you have to stand up. You have to protect your image that you built over years as a defender of human rights, a defender of democracy. What happened to all those values? values that you have promoted. Stand by them. It's not the military, it's not somebody else. You suffered the house arrest and all this for years and years. You believed on some principles. What happened to those principles? Is it because just you want to stay in power, you have to go along with military and everybody else? What would they do? They will put you back into prison or something like that.
Do you think she still deserves that Nobel Peace Prize?
If she had all this story in front of the committee, I'm sure committee will never give her the prize.
Just talking about your own country, Bangladesh, which is hosting 1 million Rohingya refugees who have fled persecution in Myanmar, I think more than 500,000 just since August alone.
Yeah.
Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has been commended by a lot of people in the international community for taking in the refugees, for speaking on behalf of refugees. But let's be honest, Bangladesh is a poor country with a bunch of domestic problems that need tackling. How long can it continue to host this growing Rohingya refugee population within its borders?
It's not only simply economic issue. It's a political issue. Yeah. It's a security issue. So you have 1 million people who belong to another country, came to your country, and they're already taking up arms against their situation. And it becomes the den of all the terrorist activities very soon. And all the international connections of the terrorism will begin. And this will be terrible for Bangladesh and terrible for the region. And all these things will come on in an explosive way as days go by. So I'm saying that it has to be resolved very fast before all those elements can be active and create trouble for everybody.
Okay. Many are concerned that in Bangladesh, Hifazat-e-Islam, a quote-unquote Islamist pressure group in Bangladesh, is exploiting the influx of Rohingya refugees. They're organizing mass protests around the issue. They're even threatening to wage jihad against Myanmar if, quote, the army doesn't stop torturing Muslims. How worried are you that groups like Hifazat are getting a big PR boost in Bangladesh from the Rohingya crisis and becoming even more influential in what was once traditionally deemed to be a secular democracy, not an Islamist country?
This issue, the Rohingyas and the refugees, will become the fodder for all kinds of negative activities, including the extreme one, the terrorism. So these are only demonstrations. I'm worried about the terrorism that it will breed because of the frustrations in the young people. We are not seeing the young people yet, but when they came, mostly were women and children. These children will grow up. Who's giving them the education? Who is going to the future? What is the future they look up to? So they will be very ready to...
You believe the Rohingya refugee crisis is a recruiting sergeant, in a sense, for the ISIL?
Absolutely. I'm saying that it's a concentrated hub for recruitment and promotion of terrorism.
And just one last question on this issue. On Bangladesh and on Myanmar, Sheikh Hasina has said that Myanmar has pretended like they wanted a war. The Bangladeshi government have accused Myanmar drones and choppers of violating its airspace. Are you worried that this conflict could erupt into an outright open war between the two countries?
That is a regional security issue right now. Which direction it will take, we don't know. Because if in the name of Rohingya something will happen, somebody will use the Rohingya name to make it happen. So any direction it can go. It's not only between Bangladesh and Myanmar. I'm saying all the regional countries will become involved in it. India will get involved with it. Pakistan will get involved with it. All the terrorist groups will involved with Middle East and so on. How many countries will get involved? God knows. Because this is a very attractive thriving area, staging area for the terrorist activities.
Muhammad Yunus, let's talk about your new book, A World of Three Zeros, The New Economics of Zero Poverty, Zero Unemployment and Zero Net Carbon Emissions. It's focused on capitalism, in particular unfettered capitalism and growing wealth inequality around the world. You write in the book that the structure of the present economic system is, quote, a ticking time bomb waiting to destroy everything we have created over the years. What do you mean by that exactly?
A very simple thing, that the way the concentration of wealth is taking place in the world, it is just leading to the ticking time bomb, any day to explode. Today, 8 people in the world own more wealth than the bottom half of the entire world's population. And tomorrow, it will be 1 person will be owning half the population's worth of wealth in the hand of 1. And day after, probably 1 person will own 85% of the wealth of the entire world. This is the direction. It will not far-flung time period. It's just about next few years it will happen.
So a lot of people who read your book or listen to you speak now, especially on the right, will say, look, there is a problem with wealth inequality, income inequality, but you're not looking at the big picture, which is the growth in incomes across the board. You acknowledge in the book that since 1990, global extreme poverty has been cut in half. If you look at China, for example, that's had a lot to do with economic growth. 800 million people have been lifted out of poverty there since 1980. That's a kind of capitalism too.
Yeah, it is capitalism. It is capitalism which is helping people get out of poverty in a slow motion way again. But when you talk about the growth of the economy, I'm not concerned about the growth of the economy. I'm concerned with the growth of people.
So what do you say to people who read your book and say, but you're deliberately vague about A, how you switch to this new system of yours, and B, how your system would actually lead to zero poverty and zero unemployment? Those are big goals.
Yeah, I mentioned that because I'm saying every business should have a parallel business of social business. And this is because we have it, not because I'm imposing on it. If you feel that, yes, you want to contribute, you want to play a part in solving problems of unemployment, problem solving of the housing, healthcare, and so on and so forth, all the things that we know. If you can play that, everyone doing that, this problem will be solved at the same time. Wealth concentration.
But you know, you're not the first to say that. It sounds very utopian. You talk in the book about super happiness. We need to taste super happiness. Great in theory, but how do you do it in the real world? What makes
the full sentence is making money is happiness, making other people happy is a super happiness.
Okay, but again, very vague. These are not economic concepts.
It's not a vague.
It is vague. You can't measure stuff like that.
No, I understand. I keep telling when people say, oh, I don't feel super happiness. I said, because you have not done that. I said, why didn't you just try? And instead of saying that food that in front of you.
Okay, but that's a very micro approach, telling individuals to be happy. It's almost like a self-help guide. Systemic. Yours is a systemic critique of capitalism. Do you have a systemic replacement and a way to get there?
Yeah. Systemic replacement is there will be two kinds of business. It's your choice. Capitalist system is all about choice. That's what they pride about. We have choice. But when it comes to business, there is no choice. You have to make money. You have to make a profit. You have to maximize profit. I said, that's not an option. You give people option. Let them choose whether they want to do that, make profit maximization, or change the world by creating social business, addressing the problem. You have not even addressed that issue.
You say in your book that people without a future get angry at that desperately poor people will be driven to crime. Would you extend that analogy about marginalized, angry people turning to crime to the debate over radicalization? Is that what's also driving young people, especially young men in places like Bangladesh, into the arms of groups like ISIL, in your view?
If the wealth concentration continues the way it does, it will generate tremendous amount of anger in the bottommost people. It will come out in politics, it will come out in social interactions, it will come out in economics. And I gave the example, probably Brexit is an example of that. They are blaming the others for taking away their job, their income, and so on. And politicians use this kind of feeling and say, yes, if you vote for us, we will stop that immigration, come out of European Union.
But just specifically on the issue of radicalization, do you believe these socioeconomic trends and pressures are feeding into the radicalization
Anger
narrative?
goes in all directions. Radicalization is a part of that. So if you're angry, you do all kinds of things. So logic doesn't guide you anymore. Not only in Brexit, I said, even in US election, same thing happened. The people at the bottom got very angry with the system. They protested against it. In German election, recently, the people who were never expected to be in the parliament, they got 13% of the seats. I said, these are probably the reaction generated at the bottom because they are frustrated, they are angry because they see the system is not working for them. I said, it will become worse and worse.
Mohammed Yunus, thank you for joining me on UpFront.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot. In what's been pegged its third wave, the F word is becoming popular again. Yes, feminism. And central to the current debate is the idea that women's choices matter. To vote, act, dress as they see fit. So should feminists support all women's choices? Some say that certain choices are holding women and the feminist movement back. Joining me to debate this are Megan Murphy, founder and editor of Canada's Feminist Current website and a self-defined radical feminist who's been critical of the choice feminism movement, and Jamia Wilson, executive director of Feminist Press, who calls herself an intersectional black feminist and is the author of an upcoming book on Beyonce and feminism. Thank you both for joining me on UpFront. Megan Murphy, you consider yourself a radical feminist, and you've said that the choice framework supporting women's freedom to make choices simply normalizes sexism, erases feminism, and works to remove the still dire need for radical activism. What do you say to fellow feminist critics of yours who say, you know, that kind of approach is policing what's authentically feminist? It's making feminism too narrowly defined. It doesn't give women enough individuality.
So the radical in radical feminism just means to get at the root. It doesn't mean extreme. All it means is to look at feminism as a collective political movement for the liberation of all women. So that's why I talk about moving away from personal choice as a focus and personal empowerment as a focus, because People can make personal choices as much as they want, but how does that contribute to the liberation of all women is the question.
Well, let me put that question to Jamia, and let me also ask you this, Jamia. You've spoken about feminisms as a plural that addresses, quote, a need to be more expansive about the definition of feminism. If, for example, women choose to work in industries traditionally viewed as harmful, objectifying, sex work, pornography, is that a choice that they've made that's advancing women's liberation, equality, in your view? Because some would say it is.
I believe personally that, there needs to be a distinction that is made between human trafficking and also people who participate in the sex industry in a variety of ways based on their own choices and their consent. And we can look at social systems that would lead us to be in situations that could be objectifying, not saying that they are for all people who choose to work in that industry, but we also erase the experiences of people who say that this is about their own self-determination and autonomy. And I really find it problematic to be in the business of policing choices that women are saying that they are making for whatever their reasons are to survive and take care of their families.
It's not to be critical of choices and to talk about the context that surround and influence those choices isn't policing. So feminists who are critical of the sex trade are not criticizing the women in the sex trade. They're not saying you're doing something immoral, you're doing something wrong. But we see it as part of a larger context. So we understand that things like colonialism, imperialism, capitalism, and of course patriarchy, and white supremacy, racism, those all play into the choices that women are making to participate in the sex trade. And there isn't this clear line between trafficking and prostitution, or what some call sex work. The line is very blurred. There's not...
So if a woman who works in the sex industry says to you, look, Megan, I made a choice, I'm happy to be here, it's a feminist choice, what would you say to that?
Well, I would say the fact that one woman is having what she says is a positive experience doesn't change the larger implications of the sex trade, what the existence of a sex trade means, which is around, male entitlement. And I wouldn't say it was a feminist choice because I don't understand how her choice to sell sex liberates other women, liberates women as a collective. I don't know what that contributes towards ending patriarchy.
Jamia, do you agree with that?
One thing I would like to share is that I haven't had that experience of working in that industry, so I can't speak to what every woman's experience is. But I can say that what I think is most important is that they do define their experiences on their terms and also share a collective story of what that experience may be. I think, being a part of an organization
so in your
represents...
view, could those experiences be labeled feminist experiences?
In my perception and my view, yes, because I believe in a variety of approaches to feminism. I personally fundamentally believe that liberation will come when we dismantle patriarchy, capitalism, white supremacy, and imperialism? Yes. But I also know that different people have different experiences and theories of change about how to get to liberation. And especially in times like now with the rise of authoritarianism and terrorism around the world, I'm interested in creating bridges to talk with other feminists about how we can build in spaces where we have common ground.
I think that if we're going to say, if it's her personal experience, that her personal experience is empowering or liberating, therefore maybe the sex trade is fine, maybe it's even feminist, I think that that argument doesn't work, because what if a woman who is being abused at home says, my experience is fine, I don't understand it as abuse, I don't experience it as abuse, I'm fine? Are we going to say that man isn't abusive? If a woman is raped and she says, it's fine, I feel fine about my experience, are we going to say, well, that's not an abusive thing that this man did, that's not a harmful thing that this man did? Of course not. What we're talking about is what men are doing to women.
And you've said in the past that you disagree with the idea, quote, that if you simply think a thing is feminist, it becomes feminist. Mm-hmm. So for the sake of our viewers watching it all across the world, what makes something feminist? What's your definition?
So feminism is a political movement to liberate women from the system of patriarchy and male supremacy. So I think that in order for a thing to be feminist, it has to contribute to that goal.
Jamia, would you agree with that definition?
So my question to Megan would be, who decides? Because I think that one of the things, for example, just going back to the question that you mentioned before around if someone experienced abuse, but that wasn't, or abuse happened and they didn't experience it as such. I agree that those systemic problems should be addressed. But what concerns me is that when we focus our critiques in a way that we promote stigma in a culture that already undermines women's voices and experiences, or when we focus our critiques in a way that contributes to the politics of respectability, then we actually further silence people's experiences and make it harder for them to get access to the support they need. And one reason I'll say this, for example, when we were talking about the sex industry, is that criminalization, for example, is an issue that I'm very concerned about as a woman of color. And so I have a lot of concerns about furthering stigma and also normalizing a narrative that could actually be dangerous and threaten people's lives.
So feminists support the decriminalization of prostituted people. No feminist argues that prostituted people should be criminalized. That's what we're all fighting for. And I'm not sure how feminists contribute to stigma by criticizing systems of power that are racist and sexist and capitalist and really harmful.
So on that note, and Jameer's mentioned stigma, we've talked about sex work and pornography. On the other end of the spectrum, you have Muslim women, some Muslim women who choose to cover their faces with a veil, with a niqab. And there's a lot of liberal feminist women in Europe, in France and elsewhere who have argued against that, even called for bans on that in the name of feminism, in the name of challenging patriarchy, misogyny, oppression of women. And there's a lot of Muslim women who wear those face veils who say no, who defend it on feminist grounds, who say we're doing this because it's our choice, we want to do this. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think that for a lot of women who aren't living in the West, it's not a choice. And so I think that we should be taking that into account.
So if you're not in Saudi Arabia, but you're in France, and you're a Muslim woman who wants to wear a face veil out of choice,
I would never say that she should not be allowed to make that choice. I do think we need to, again, talk about the larger context for that choice. And, as feminists, we do need to be critical of all misogyny and all sexism, whether that's rooted in religion or culture or whatever. But no, I wouldn't support a ban.
I want to address this because I'm an American, but I grew up in Saudi Arabia, and I have learned so much from very transformative feminists in Saudi Arabia and all over the Middle East, some of whom choose to wear hijab and some who don't. And I believe that in this instance, most of the critique that I hear about people who choose, who are not coerced to cover, has been mainly from white women who are policing the way that other women around the world are adorning themselves and representing themselves. And so I think that we also need to really deconstruct this when it comes to race and also when it comes to paternalism, and to really talk about it in a nuanced way.
Let me ask about men and feminism. There's an article on your website, Megan, Feminist Current, which says, never before have we seen so many men clamoring to be feminists. If men love third-wave feminism, and they do, it's because they know full well it will not seek to unseat them. Is that a view you share?
Definitely. I mean, I think that the reason why men love third-wave feminism is because it promotes the idea that women can self-objectify, and that's empowering, and that if we choose to wear stilettos and get cosmetic surgery and participate in pornography, then that's all feminist. I mean, it doesn't challenge male power at all. So of course, men like those kinds of feminisms.
Jameer?
I differ in that opinion. I really feel like the men in my life, including the father who raised me, were engaged in feminism and present-day feminism because they see a place for themselves in it, and an inclusive movement that recognizes that none of us will get free when patriarchy still remains intact, when white supremacy still remains intact. For example, discussions that are happening within third wave and beyond conversations around toxic masculinity are also talking about how it harms men and how it puts men into a limited and narrow standard that doesn't allow them to be in the fullness of their human experience. So I really think that the feminism that I show up for has nothing to do with male validation. It has to do with inclusion and also collective liberation.
I just want to be clear.
We're almost out of time. Briefly, Megan, last word.
I think that men can be allies. I know lots of men who are really amazing feminist allies. My point is that Feminism is about women, and so I think it's important to center women's needs and women's voices, and I think that this movement should be led by women, and I think that men can support the movement, and I think that men can ally with feminists, but they should not be central to the conversation, and they should not be central to the political movement that is feminism.
Megan, Jameer, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you both for joining me in the arena.
Thanks.
That's our show. Up Front will be back next week.